as the architects of Gilead knew, to institute an effective totalitarian system. That's a tough one for Elmo. That's a big one for Elmo. All right. Totalitarian. Woo! All right. Hi, I'm Gabe.
And I'm Kat.
And we're the Ghouls next door. Talk about spooky stuff.
Yeah.
Like the world.
Yeah, let me tell you, we're gonna say so many words today. So many words. So many pages. Like if you read our blog, you're gonna be like, wow, they wrote a book kind of about this book in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, we are saddle in for a very long episode. I'm sure you saw the runtime and you're like, wow, that's not usually there an hour, and we have to force them to shut up then.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? We had a lot to say. It is really hard to write about books.
Yeah.
In a concise manner. But for those listening, we are the media analysis, media literacy show from a horror lens, where we explore the real life, historical, and actual real occurring things happening outside, influences behind our cinematic fears. And this is our It Is Written series, where we are talking about writers and a specific work of theirs, and really diving into some of the messaging and is terrifying things that are in there, or the failure or success of work as well. We have completed Octavia Butler, and we talked about the Earthseed series, and then last week we were talking about Margaret Atwood. So take a guess about what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. I want to preface before I say words a long time. I know you go first, but still, that I'm not as mad at Margaret. She's fine. It's more just like the situation.
Yeah,
it's nothing personal.
It's just also existing in this.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's how I feel. You'll hear about it.
I also am not mad at Margaret. As I mentioned in the last episode, like I'm a big fan of hers, or a decent fan of hers. I've read quite a bit of her work and plan to read more. I do. But it just kind of comes with the territory of certain writers that sometimes they're not going to be fully the things that you need, and there's going to be some questions that you ask, which is totally fine.
Yeah. And the book was written in 1985.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long, but it was like long enough ago that the early 2000s were horrible for saying words. So anything even before that is gonna guarantee to have some flaws in there.
Yeah. They're definitely products of their time.
Yeah.
So
you still talk about them, you still critique them. They exist, but you can't. It's already done. It's been written. It is written. So,
as we say in the show.
Yeah, that's why there's a sequel. We haven't read that yet. Maybe that one does it a little better.
We'll see. It's definitely on the list. Mm-hmm. And make sure you check out our TikTok for my book talk takes.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting.
So, yeah, Gabe does great book talks. Watch Gabe say words about books. You did one.
I did.
You did one.
I'm going to do another one. It's going to be great.
Yeah,
let's hop in because it's going to be crazy.
Do it. Million words, go.
We are talking about The Handmaid's Tale from 1985, and it is about set in a near future New England in a strongly patriarchal, totalitarian, theonomic state known as the Republic of Gilead, which has overthrown the United States government. The central character and narrator is a woman named Offred, one of the handmaids, a group of women who are forcibly assigned to produce children for the commanders, the ruling class of men in Gilead. And it's written by Margaret Atwood. So let me tell you about this book. If you haven't read it, feel free to read it. It's pretty interesting. It gets a little like you got to really get into it, just because of the way, like the formatting of the way she writes it.
Mm-hmm.
Any like quotes in the past aren't in quotations, which are hard to realize until you're you're in it.
Yeah.
Um,
Much time skip, little
yeah,
explanation of
lots,
time skip happen.
and then you're just like there. It's kind of like
Yeah.
stream of consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and it ends rather abruptly, the way that sometimes historical diaries do.
Mm-hmm.
You should watch the show. The show's great. There's some things we like, some things we don't like about the show, but it does like it gets the gist and tries to do a bit more with the story than Atwood was able to do, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like now 5 seasons and hers is just the one book.
Yeah.
So well, now two.
Yeah.
So let me tell you about it, and I'll put in the show notes when I stop the synopsis, so that you can just
Jump
go
ahead.
to my
Yeah.
analysis parts, if you want to. But I feel like everyone already knows. Like, it was hard for me to be like, I'm typing this and everybody knows what happens in
Yeah.
Handmaid's Tale. But Handmaid's Tale takes place in the near future, as I explained before. It is America, and it is where a religious fundamentalist radical group known as the Sons of Jacob have assassinated the president and most of Congress, and have enacted a coup and/or insurrection to install their own ideal theocracy. This world, inspired by reality and much in the vein of Atwood's favorite themes, is one plagued by ecological disaster. Due to nuclear weapons, pollution, and our dirty habits, the earth has become infertile, and so have humans. There's a decline in birth rates, though the government, again, much like our own right now,
Mm-hmm.
seem to care a bit for one specific type of baby than others. But birth rates have dropped.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a need for children. And in the show, it's just like that trumps everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we just need babies, so nothing else. All of a sudden, we forgot everything else that's problem. It's kind of like
Yeah.
they don't compile onto each other.
Yeah.
Anyway, they want babies that are born. They want new babies because a lot of babies are being born with deformity or other illnesses. And I'm just going to table the ableism for a moment with that,
Yeah.
because it's like, it's still a baby. Still a
Yeah.
baby. But that's not really what they talk about. Anyway, it did remind me of pre-pandemic world. I remember one of the scariest things that was going around was H1N1, swine flu, and how it affected birds. And there
Mm-hmm.
was a bit of some scare going on. And that felt very Handmaid's Tale to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the end of the novel actually explains how we ended up in that specific uh, pot of horrible things happening in our world. And so it even touches on, just slightly, political and racial issues. So
Mm-hmm.
the book says, the reasons for this decline are not altogether clear to us. Some of the failure to reproduce can undoubtedly be traced to the widespread availability of birth control of various kinds, including abortion, in the immediate pre-Gilead period. Some infertility then was willed, which may account for the differing statistics among Caucasians and non-Caucasians, but the rest was not. Need I remind you that this was the age of the R-strain syphilis and also of the infamous AIDS epidemic, which, once they spread to the population at large, eliminated many young sexually active people from the reproductive pool. Stillbirths, miscarriages, and genetic deformities were widespread and on the increase, and this trend has been linked to the various nuclear plant accidents, shutdowns, and incidents of sabotage that characterize the period, as well as to leakages from chemical and biological warfare stockpiles and toxic waste disposal sites, of which there were many thousands, both legal and illegal. In some instances, these materials were simply dumped into the sewage system, into the uncontrolled use of chemical insecticides, herbicides, and other sprays. And you can tell that it was made in 1985, where those are some of the concerns, and we live in a world that's like significantly more concerning than that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, AIDS it's not on the way out, but it isn't as fatal as it had been. People can live for a very long time with AIDS now. But
Hmm.
instead, we have monkeypox and we don't know what that's doing. So
Yeah.
there's always something.
COVID,
We
other
got
things.
COVID,
Yeah.
we got monkeypox, we got things going on out there. Um, we do have like nuclear waste. We have clean coal, quote unquote. Like, just,
Yeah, that
yes.
ridiculous car commercial that's like, we're an eco car. And I was like, what does that mean?
No. Yeah. We do have like we don't have overpopulation, but we do have a lot of population, and that means we have to feed a lot of people, which means that we have a lot of animals, which means they're giving out a lot of gas. It's a lot. The environment's in trouble even more than it was in 1985. So,
Hmm.
completely valid. And also, all of those issues mentioned about the birth rates declining, including the just simple choice that nobody wants kids right now because the world sucks in so many ways. We don't want babies. And
Yeah.
now, currently, our government's trying to take even that away. It's not even just like if you accidentally get pregnant, now they don't even want you to not be able to get like
Yeah.
what are we doing,
Pop them
Gilead? It's
out.
happening right now.
Yeah.
But this new world, Gilead, places white Christians, cis men at places of power. Hmm. What a magical, mystical world this is. In Gilead, women are categorized. They're not allowed to read, write, or do much of anything. Some of them are allowed to garden. Some of them are allowed to go shopping with not their money.
Hmm.
They don't have jobs, with the exception of the serving class, Marthas. They can't have their own money or their own jobs in those things. They're stripped of their rights and privileges, and they live only to serve the men.
Hmm.
Uh, what an idyllic world, right? Our protagonist, Offred, or June in the show, I can't remember if she ever says her name in
I
the
don't
book.
remember it being stated. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know at the end she says that Nick called her by her name, but that's what she says. He
Mm.
called me by my name,
Hmm.
not what her name was. So
Yeah.
Offred is a handmaid. Women that were divorced pre-Gilead, have never been married, and are fertile are handmaids. Some even are labeled gender traitors for being queer. These women are forced to serve the men in power. Their names are that of the household's patriarch. So her name is of Fred. These women have one purpose: to bear children for these powerful and important men. And as Offred explains, we are two-legged wombs, that's all, sacred vessels, ambulatory chalices. Once a month, the handmaids are forced to participate in a cult practice of state-sanctioned rape, mirroring the biblical story of Rachel, who gifted her husband her handmaid. Yeah, gifted her husband her handmaid, Bila, to use as a wife and bear children. Use as a wife, not be his wife, okay?
Hmm.
And bear children. And it says, and she gave him Bila, her handmaid, to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. And that is from Genesis 30, 3 through 5. Um,
Cool.
so I actually was confused. Like I think I mentioned this in the when we did our with the show version. There's a separate story where there's like this one couple that are like old. I think it's Abraham, and God's like, I'm gonna give you children, and they like keep trying, and it never happens. So they're like, I think he means you need to sleep with my maid to have kids. And then God's like, that's not what I meant. He like gets mad at them. And then they cast out that kid, by the way. So that's fun. Um, the
Yeah.
Bible. We
Bible's interesting. Let's do it.
pick and choose which parts of the Bible we're gonna pick here. Handmaids wear red dresses and white bonnets. That's the distinct things that you see. You see that everywhere, even in places it shouldn't be in our current world, like in
Yeah.
weddings. There are the commander's wives who wear blue. They have some semblance of power, being married to the controllers of the country, but they have failed at their womanly duty, like the only thing that they're good for, and they are unable to give birth. I want to say that is the statement of Gilead, not me. It's like
Hmm.
women are more
More
than,
than
we're
their
not just
wombs.
machines.
Yeah.
Anyway, they don't have any rights either, and are also traumatized by this new world. But like white feminists today, these wives have worked to uphold the powers of men, uh, because they also kind of get some power from it.
Yeah.
So it's like, why mess it up? Some of
They
them
get to
even,
also oppress for treat.
yeah, they get to press for tree, exactly. They get to have just a little bit of power,
Hmm.
so that like they're not at the bottom, so they feel good. Um, They're not allowed to read either and are reduced to the mundane task of knitting. And Offred even explains that this practice could be pointless, suggesting the knitted pieces could be later unraveled so that the yarn could be used again. So it's like they think they're knitting scarves for the men on the front line of the war, and then they just unravel them, hand them back.
Be like, do that again.
I think it's very funny. I'm sorry. And then, worst of all, they also have to participate in the state-sanctioned rape of the handmaids by their own husbands. They are also a part of the process. And there's a point where when it's happening, where Offred wonders to herself, like, who has it worse? Like, obviously she has it worse, but like that the wife does not have it easy. Especially if she is indoctrinated into this ideology, like she must also bear the weight of failure, that she can't do that for her husband and has to let this other person do it. Like, if you think that's all you're worth and that's all God wants from you, you really messed up. That can't be good to live with.
Yeah.
So there's like some sympathy for even the wives, though they're not like, it's, we see them, we see women just like that out there.
Yeah, you can acknowledge that they don't have it easy, but that they're also a problem.
Yeah, exactly. There are Marthas. This is a title. And they are, as I mentioned before, servants of Gilead. They are either too old or for other reasons barren. Still, they are of use and made into maids and cooks for the house. And they wear green. The aunts are older women who train and indoctrinate the handmaids. They believe in the future and see it as their purpose to explain the importance of the handmaids, to protect them and brainwash them. Their power is reminiscent of a certain social experiment in prisons where they let some of the inmates become like the guards, and they would like abuse that power. And it was just like, aren't people like awful? I think it was like the Philadelphia.
It's also like a common thing that they do to better oppress people. They'll like recruit communities of the oppressed group to act as hands of the oppression.
Yeah. I mean, think about like Uncle Tom, right? Or there was that experiment in the high school where it was like talking about like showing them about Nazi Germany, where they made like all the blue-eyed kids be important. And they started like attacking the brown-eyed kids or whatever. They'd be like that. But in the book, they say, as the architects of Gilead knew to institute an effective totalitarian system. That's a tough one for Elmo. That's a big one for Elmo. All right. Totalitarian. Woo! All right. As the architects of Gilead knew, to institute an effective totalitarian system, or indeed any system at all, you must offer some benefits and freedoms, at least to a privileged few, in return for those you remove. When power is scarce, a little of it is tempting. And this is what the scholars say in the end about the aunts, because there's scholars who like found her tapes in the end. There's also the Econo wives, who wear red, blue, and green stripes. They're the wives of like the lower ranking, less important men who are expected to fulfill all the roles of the women listed above. So they're the Marthas, the wives, and the handmaids. And they just, the one aunt says like, one day there will be no Econo wives because, we'll have wealth in the country. Like, that's not how war works, babe.
It's also not how capitalism works.
Yeah. The novel is Offred's tale. She explains in pieces her experiences of now and how we arrived in this world, into this point of time. She is currently in her third assignment, her third house, where she is being a handmaid, and there is this fear of being labeled an unwoman for being unable to bear a child, and it sits heavily on her conscience. Unwomen are sent to the colonies, forced to clean up the toxic waste humanity is left behind. We learn later that Offred's activist mother has been sent here. Women unable to have children, gender traders who are infertile, and other problematic women are sent here. It is in essence a death sentence, death by work camp. We learn of the small ways the world changed around Offred. Like the slow way that she started to notice that things were going awry. Like there's a moment where her baby is stolen in a shopping center. It's a little more dramatic in the show. It's like kind of just offhandedly mentioned. And again, she feels like, and it makes sense, but she feels bad for the lady who like tried to
Mhm.
take her kid.
Yeah.
Her rights are slowly stripped away, and we get to see those in chunks throughout her story. And there were many warning signs, but no one made moves to stop it. In the book, it says, ignoring isn't the same as ignorance. You have to work at it. And so everyone was actively ignoring what was happening. It's
Yeah.
the frog, and the water is heating up real slow.
Mhm.
The commander, Fred, she's a Fred, asked to see Offred outside of the ceremony, and this is something that's illegal and dangerous, but they do it nonetheless. And meeting in the library late at night, they play Scrabble and talk. Again, she's not allowed to read, so it's really exciting to see letters.
Mhm.
Even when they don't make up sentences. Offred is given small favors and is expected to serve the commander outside of her role of handmaid. This includes kissing him like she means it, wearing really old lingerie, and he slowly shares information about his unhappy relationship with his wife, Serena Joy. And when he gives her this lipstick and lingerie, he brings her to a government-run brothel called Jezebel's. And it's here that Offred sees her friend Moira once again, who was like her best friend from before times, that she also saw in the training center and didn't know where she was. And apparently she had broken out of the handmaid's training facility and was sent to Jezebel's as a punishment. She's also a gender traitor because she's a lesbian and therefore condemned to that.
Mhm.
We in the book don't ever get to know what happens to Moira. Offred envisions that maybe she burns it all down. She finally gets like this justice. She does something,
Mhm.
but it really is just wishful thinking because it's
Yeah.
very unlikely that that's what happens. Um, well, thinking that her husband is infertile, Serena Joy suggests Offred sleep with Nick, the house's servant, and later the two continue the affair on their own. This gives Offred some semblance of sexual control and even just control of her life, period, and she believes herself to be pregnant.
Mhm.
Serena Joy learns of Offred and Commander's relationship, and later the secret police, known as the Eyes, arrive to take Offred away. Nick tells her to trust him and go with them, that they are Mayday, a resistant group, but not knowing if Nick is also an Eye or a member of Mayday resistance, she reluctantly goes, and it leaves the readers unaware of her fate.
Mhm.
Um, and the last chapter is just some guys talking about it, like
Yeah, it's just like historians.
like we don't know what is good or bad. Like we don't know what happened.
Yeah. Can we trust the narrator? I don't know.
It's like yes and no, because she wasn't like she painted herself as the best person.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the biggest things about this book, that we definitely felt even stronger after reading the Earthseed series is that there really is a big lack of intersectionality, whether that's race, sexuality, trans issues, so like race, gender, sexuality, there's just not a lot. It's very dismissive. She speaks from what she knows. So
Yeah.
let's unpack some of the things in the story and where it may fail. So the world of Gilead is truly terrifying and awful. Yes. The real horror, however, is that none of it is impossible or made up. It's all based on real things that occurred and continue to occur in this world. Atwood said herself, nothing went into it that has not happened in real life somewhere at some time. The reason I made that rule is that I didn't want anyone saying, you certainly have an evil imagination. You made up all these bad things. I didn't make them up. The thing about The Handmaid's Tale in Gilead is that though it's not new, it is a world in which these horrible tragedies are happening to a specific demographic of women now. Like
Mhm.
that's what the big thing about Gilead is. Though we don't live in Gilead now, many of the experiences and traumas shown in the novel are experienced every day and historically by women of color, differently abled folk, and the queer population.
Yeah.
It's important to note that Atwood set out to tell a story about a specific experience, that of the white woman. And in the novel, Offred even hears a TV news report that explains how the children of Ham, which is a term from biblical precedent that was used to justify slavery, were being shipped out to the homelands in the West. This was because Atwood aimed to explore not a patriarchal hellscape, but one that was founded in white supremacy. Um, Not only a patriarchal hellscape, but one that was founded in white supremacy. It's an important choice. It certainly leaves one wanting, as I'd like to have heard from someone other than Offred about these experiences, but then it wouldn't have been The Handmaid's Tale. Would it? It would have been those other people's tale. Um, as explained in our last episode, Atwood works hard to shy away from speaking on narratives and experiences that she herself doesn't understand or experience. Um, this is why, instead of including trans or BIPOC experiences explicitly in the story, these communities are simply written away,
Yeah.
which can be a benefit to some degree because she's not out here trying to say stuff that she shouldn't be saying. But you can also ask, that's a big thing. It's like we just ask people to talk about things. But these characters are written away either as gender traitors sent to the colonies or BIPOC women sent to the West. This allows her to explore the horrible world of Gilead from the safe point of view of a white woman. It acknowledges the white supremacy without ever actually addressing it completely. As if that would be like the only answer. Like we could just like it makes sense that Offred wouldn't know what happened to those people and that she wouldn't care.
Yeah.
Like that there's like for all the horrible that's happening to her, it has to be so significantly worse in the West. Not talking about it. That part isn't there. In the show, the executive producer Bruce Miller worked hard to intentionally add BIPOC actors to the cast, which sounds good in theory. And his reasoning, he explained, was that I made the decision that fertility trumped everything, Miller goes on to say. Also, honestly, what's the difference between making a TV show about racists and making a racist TV show? Why would we be covering the story of Handmaid Offred rather than telling the story of people of color who got sent off to Nebraska? He felt that the answer to that question was to simply have colorblind casting. He casted Orange is the New Black Samira Wiley as Offred's best friend Moira, as well as changing Offred's family into a mixed race one, her husband a black man and her daughter mixed. However, the answer I thought made the most sense would not be to remove the white supremacist threat entirely, but instead do exactly as he suggested, which is tell the story of people of color who got sent off to Nebraska. I still want to know. And by including a black Moira, who is now the sassy black best friend stereotype, another problem, but not acknowledging the effects of a black handmaid, like in what they would experience, is ignorant. Would a black handmaid be as desired as a white one in Gilead? Furthermore, how would Offred's husband be treated in a world like Gilead, a land where he also doesn't have any power? He's reduced to a time in which America had been great, so great that he wouldn't have had property, autonomy, or rights.
Yep.
And that's not really listed at all. Like he's like, first of all, in the show, the first character we know is dead. Black man. That's cool. That's fun. But he just saved it. He fixed it because he colorblind casted it. Anyway, this attempted modernization of the world fails to acknowledge the true horrors of our actual reality. It ignores the America we already have that is built upon the bodies of Black and Indigenous people. The show dismisses our racist systems, reducing the problems purely to that of gender. As if that's it. Which is like kind of how she lives her life, kind of how she writes things sometimes. And for a world so heavily influenced by eugenics, it is completely missing some of those core concepts of eugenics. Eugenics was founded here in America. That's what inspired Hitler. We did. And mostly used as an excuse to harm Black and brown bodies and queer bodies and just differently abled bodies. In our episode where we interviewed the director of Belly of the Beast, we discussed the forced sterilization of Black and brown women in our incarceration systems. We already live in Gilead. It just doesn't look the way that you think. We are all the frogs softly boiling in the pot. The book wants us to wake up before that reality affects the white women too. It's really the end.
I say it a bunch in my section.
I'm gonna keep going though. The decision to send the Black folks away is intentional. It's a deliberate act that seems incredibly plausible. In a Nerds of Color article by Shannon Gibney titled Race, Intersectionality, and the End of the World, The Problem with the Handmaid's Tale, they explain, the children of Ham discussed in chapter 14 of the novel can be understood as a revival of the American colonization society dream. The idea, warmly supported by white abolitionist luminaries from Thomas Jefferson to Harriet Beecher Stowe to Abraham Lincoln, that the best way to deal with Black people when you hate slavery a little bit more than you hate slaves, to paraphrase Toni Morrison, is to ship them back to any random place on the continent of Africa or perhaps to a Caribbean island. Just like, instead of reparations and giving them money because we brought them here and we harmed them, just send them away and then they're not our problem anymore.
Yeah, if you don't have to look at the problem, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, we just free them, we send them away. We don't have to actually do anything.
Yeah.
And it's a gift. They're going to thank us because they're somewhere else. Okay. Ultimately.
Also, Nebraska isn't either of those places.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but continue.
Like, if anything, they probably would send them to like Puerto Rico. Because like we send all the things we don't want there. And we won't let them go. Anyway.
Mhm.
Ultimately, one of the biggest issues I have with this book and Atwood's lens is how insular it feels. After reading something as complex as Octavia Butler's Earthseed series, it is hard to imagine this finite, minimal experience of a white woman in a white man's world. For all the research and inspiration Atwood did for this book, we as readers are denied the full picture of her dystopia. It ignores the real world tragedies that BIPOC women, differently abled, and queer folks experience right now. Furthermore, Offred is not a hero, nor is she a feminist. For her work that's like been, lobbied as this feminist tale, it is absolutely not. We actually discussed last week how Margaret Atwood was hesitant to label her work as being feminist. Even the show's star, Elizabeth Moss, who plays Offred, refused to acknowledge the show as feminist, although she has problems herself for being a Scientologist, but we also covered that in our Handmaid's Tale episode. But that's because the word feminist is seen kind of as a dirty word. It's misunderstood and changed into something vicious and hateful. It is equated with misandry. Moss's Offred is a bit feminist, though it's reluctant, like the actress. She has more attitude and power, refusing to let the bastards keep her down. But the novel's Offred is very much already down and stays down. Doesn't want to ever get up. She finds solace in small moments of her own. She smears butter on her skin after the ceremony, or she tells her story to someone. Because when we tell stories, we're telling someone after all. We're not just speaking to ourselves. So Offred is simply a survivor, not a fighter, which, to be clear, is totally acceptable. Life is really hard, especially in Gilead, and simply surviving is good enough sometimes. Totally get it. But as a protagonist, it leaves much to be desired. She is given multiple opportunities to flee or fight, and yet she remains stagnant. She is lousy with privilege. And with history, we are sometimes left with unremarkable stories. And that's what we get with Offred. There's also this big difference in how she reacts to her friend Moira coming out to her in the novel versus how Offred reacts to of Glenn coming out to her in the show, that labels her as less than an ally. At first, she is uncomfortable, assuming Moira must be in love with her. And not until Moira confirms that this is not the case does she ease back into her friendship. And she also explicitly defines Moira's sexuality as a choice, which is grossly inaccurate, but Offred is also a product of her time. And again, not a hero. She's not like this revolutionary hero, which again, that's kind of like how it works. Anyway, this whole like misunderstanding of the word feminist is why some people are, leaning more towards what is it, eco-feminist, Kat? Or womanist.
Okay.
Because like people just hear feminist and they think of something else.
Evil.
I was like, that's not what that is. It's probably equality. Like, we just want to also have rights. Is that okay? Like, excuse me, is it okay if like I decide what happens to this vessel that I'm in?
No.
My whole life? No.
They say no.
Right.
Say, no.
Never did I feel empowered by or enraged for Offred in the novel. I was disgusted by the world around her, but I could frankly not care less about her specifically, which is why I appreciate the show, which allows us to step outside her small world. We get to know the other handmaids, the wives, and those in power, and I just really have liked to also look at the places in the West. I think we're really missing a really big part of what's going on, because I bet the reason that Offred was even able to get out if she got out was because there was probably revolutions in the West. There's probably that happening. Like, why?
Yeah.
Anyway, because that's how that works. Like, that's what happens.
Well, yeah, because all of her ways of out were just other people doing it for her. Like she was just like, okay, I'll go along. That sounds good.
Like it didn't take until she had literally no other choice. Like the black car was there to take her away, and that's the only reason she was like, well, I guess I have to go. Like she didn't actually have a choice. The choice was like kill herself, unalive herself, or go in the van. Join the van. We don't know what happened to her. But that's it.
Yeah, and this is about the book specifically. I know it does go a little different in the show. Stuff happens,
but in the book specifically, that's how it ends. But I want to also talk about why we lose when we don't include us all in this story, which is, believe it or not, there's more than just what I was saying. And though I believe the decision by Atwood to not speak on the experiences of women or people outside of her own lens, I can also see the negative impact this can have on the effect of the story. Again, we talked last week about you having power with your pen. I can, you have power with your pen. You could use it. You can also now highlight things. Anyway.
Also use your privilege to uplift other people and let them say words.
Yeah, add to it. Like your testaments could, I don't know, I haven't read them yet, but
they let you publish 50 books. You could have let somebody else do one with you.
Yeah, Octavia didn't get to do that. By lacking an intersectional approach, we are uplifting and placing value on a specific type of woman and feminist. We're telling them that this one is the one that matters. And with this tale, we're told that the world hasn't gone bad until it has reached those specific women. It ignores the complexities of feminist issues. In an article on an Injustice magazine by Julia Marsiglio titled "Feminism Must Be Intersectional or It's Just an Arm of White Supremacy," they go on to say, in summary, when we are centering the concerns of women, by definition, that is intersectional. Otherwise, we are simply centering the concerns of a group of women. We can certainly talk about the unique concerns certain women may have, such as disabled women or indigenous women. But the idea that we can first elevate white women and then worry about other women is simply an arm of white supremacy and has led to untold atrocities. This attitude is dangerous. It needs to be left in the 20th century. That's again, it's this like equating feminism with misandry, wrong. Also thinking feminism doesn't include a vast majority, like we make up half of the population of the entire world, and not and like a sliver of that is white people. Like what are you like, what are you doing? So despite its incredible impact on our current conversations around women's rights, The Handmaid's Tale is lacking. Without the intersectional perspective, we are robbed of the whole story. It isn't enough to say these women and people were sent away. We need to explore more of why. Atwood, as brave and brazen as she is, should be able to look white supremacy and the patriarchy in the face and call it out for what it is, the true villain. As a white woman feminist, she has the ability to do that. As an ally, she should. You wield such power with that pen to call out the oppressive forces by name. And I've often done that, or like at least taken credit for doing that. Imagine what we could do with that. The people we could rally. Even now, with white women showing up to Congress in full handmaid's garb, would be significantly more powerful if they knew who they should be fighting and fighting alongside, and if they knew that they should have been fighting this whole time. The last quote in this book is this: "As all historians know, the past is a great darkness and filled with echoes. Voices may reach us from it, but what they say to us is imbued with the obscurity of the matrix out of which they come. And try as we may, we cannot always decipher them precisely in the clear light of our own day. But we can, if we as a collective voice share these stories. The past is full of echoes, and luckily, we have an ability to shine a light into the darkness, to reveal them, to combat them head on. But to do that, we have to acknowledge them and fight them together."
Yeah. Yeah, you did it. Look at you did it.
Round of applause.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm probably going to repeat some of the stuff you said and just say it similarly but slightly different, just because I went on a tangent in my section. I was like, rage. Realistically.
It's fair.
Yeah.
It's an angry time.
Yeah, it's an angry time. And as I said, it's not Atwood specifically. It's just more so of what people do with the work she's created,
Mm-hmm.
what they do with the existence of it as if it is the most important only story that ever has existed, and is the only one that matters.
Yeah,
So
like the
that's
standard, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. That's more the rage.
That's just kind of like history though too, right? It's like we are so caught up in like 5 stories. And it's
Hmm.
like, wait, hold on, there's all these stories happening. And everyone's like,
Yeah.
no, we're gonna look at this one. It's
And
the
white
one that
feminists
matters.
being the worst, there's a very long historical precedent for that, which I will touch on, but it happens all the time where they just be doing the most in the most irritating and least considerate and most self-serving way.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Where they're like, I'm the one that matters. No one else matters. Only me. Um,
Yeah, like a right to vote.
yeah. And I'm going to push people down so that the zombies can get you, and then I'll go run free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For whose independence is
Yeah.
Independence Day, right? All
Yeah.
right, take it
Mhm.
away.
Just as a general content warning, I'm going to be covering some like pretty heavy stuff. Specifically, I will be discussing eugenics, forced sterilization, racism, genocide, etc. Like I'm gonna be covering some heavy stuff. So if you are sensitive to that, you do not want to hear about it right now. You have been warned and acknowledge that. And when or if you feel ready to approach those subjects, come join us here at the Ghouls Next Door in my section. So as Gabe got into a lot, there are many things that come to mind when thinking of The Handmaid's Tale, but a big thing that pops out is that it's in many ways become the face of white feminism. It presents a very specific view of oppression that doesn't necessarily ignore, but definitely glazes over BIPOC and LGBTQIA and differently abled human experiences entirely. We've actually covered the show version of this a few years back, and I think we did an okay job. We did it. I don't know if we did a bad job. I think we did an okay job. But as I said in our last episode, I think we've evolved a lot since then, and our view has been a little bit more honed. So there's like this kind of infatuation and fear surrounding The Handmaid's Tale that is often called upon by white feminists, and unfortunately is usually done in a thoughtless way, or just like a very self-serving way. But in this instance of what I'm going to say, this is very thoughtless. For example, Kylie Jenner had a Handmaid's Tale birthday party. Gabe sent me a picture of someone who had a Handmaid's Tale wedding. Literally had like everyone write of people on their little cards and stuff, and all the bridal party were handmaids. And I have noticed on Facebook and other social media platforms a flood of older white women who've made their or younger white women too, made their profile picture Handmaid's Tale robes, or have gone out into the world and gone to protests and other things wearing Handmaid's Tale robes. And it's not necessarily that like you shouldn't be scared of Handmaid's Tale world, but the reality is that that world already exists for people other than white women for a long time. And the doing of this, the dressing up and the kind of showmanship that they put around this, acts instead of like this like powerful symbol and more as just like another way for to center themselves in a movement that impacts more than just them.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go into a lot of reasons the problems involving invoking The Handmaid's Tale specifically and only to understand what's happening now is that many are doing so are not reacting because it's fine, like it's been a problem. They're reacting because it's like it's finally possibly going to become a problem for white women. It's like starting to impact white women. So now everyone needs to be mad. We didn't need to be mad before because that didn't matter according to them.
Yeah, like, hold on. Now is a bad thing. Now it's my problem.
Yeah. So the bad was tolerable before it got to white women. It was fine before, according to them. So what they do is they raise The Handmaid's Tale up and are like, this is the tale that matters the most. This is the only feminist story that matters. None of the other things matter. And that's my main problem with it. It's just like what people do with it. And as Gabe kind of talked about, like, to be honest, the lack of representation in the Handmaid's Tale book is not surprising. In that one, Margaret Atwood is a white woman, cishet white woman. She only has that lens. She could have got other people to partake and used her privilege to uplift those voices, but we are where we are. It was 1985, and it is written. But it's also not surprising in that, like, the future that is proposed in The Handmaid's Tale is exactly what white cishet men would want.
Yeah.
It's a future that they're so desperate to return to because it's something that they like did kind of already have before, and they're like real mad that it's not anymore. It's a future in which white women are forced to produce more white babies to uphold white supremacy. But this time with a twist of not explicitly naming white supremacy as the cause or like the history so much. As you said, it's like a little part of the book, chapter 14. They're like, it happened. They sent everybody away. We're not going to talk about the fact that like this entire thing is just drenched in white supremacy.
Yeah, it's like hella racist.
Yeah.
But
so it ends up being a future that mimics yet minimizes the past historical context and abuse that has been done to BIPOC and LGBTQIA and differently abled humans. Well, the book acknowledges that anyone who doesn't fit this like cishet white mold would be murdered, enslaved, abused, just as they have been before. It doesn't impact that at all, and that's the problem. The show pretends that like it kind of doesn't exist, and that they whitewash everything, or they just colorblind it. They're like, it doesn't matter if you have different colors. So where The Handmaid's Tale compares to something like Parable is that, but also that it doesn't provide like any hope or important next steps either. There's no framework, suggestions on ways to prevent it, fight it, and you're given like a protagonist that actively doesn't fight it. If anything, like she stands in the way of other people fighting it and escapes literally just from passive existence. She's just waiting for someone else to save her. And even though the book and show like totally miss this entire point, it's not surprising, but that in erasing these stories, as Gabe said, by disregarding them entirely, they're playing into the hands of the oppressor. They're playing into white supremacy. They just become another pillar of that. So many people invoking The Handmaid's Tale today do so in the same way that the show has done, disregarding the BIPOC, LGBTQIA, and differently abled experiences in a quest to save themselves. They throw them in front of the zombies. So in an article titled Why Comparing Roe v. Wade Overturned to Handmaid's Tale is Problematic by Ruta Maria Johnny, they speak to this further, saying Atwood's novel has been denounced as a white feminist dystopia, which erases the actual slavery and sexual violence endured by minorities and is only referred to in passing as exiled children of Ham. While some argue that this plotline is a depiction of white supremacy, the appropriation of Black women's slavery is still problematic. Women of color are lashing out at references to The Handmaid's Tale when their ancestors have lived through the same fiction, which has been dismissed and forgotten. The reproductive freedom of women, especially women of color, have been regulated throughout history. In fact, much of white reproductive autonomy has been maintained and built upon the commodification of BIPOC bodies with wombs capable of reproduction through medical exploitation and experimentation. According to a 2016 Huffington Post article, over 60,000 people in 32 U.S. states were sterilized for eugenics, a scientific racial improvement, in quotes, to breed more white people. Between 1997 and 2013, more than 1,400 women prisoners, primarily non-white, in California unknowingly underwent sterilizations, as per an expose by Erica Krone's documentary Belly of the Beast, which we've covered and Gabe mentioned above. If interested in learning more about that, I recommend checking out when we interviewed the director, and it was one of our previous episodes. So, like, why did we end up with this story? Why does it choose to focus on what it does? It can be understood further when looking critically at Margaret Atwood's lens in the writing of the story. In an article on environmental history now titled Bodies and Sexuality in Gilead, a queer ecofeminist reading of The Handmaid's Tale by Asme Arkia, they describe Margaret Atwood's inspiration for The Handmaid's Tale as Margaret Atwood took inspiration for The Handmaid's Tale from two major events, the rise of the Christian right in the United States during the 1970s and 80s, and the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. As a cis white woman, Margaret Atwood's lens is already skewed by default. If their inspiration came from those two events, the perspective they're pulling from doesn't prioritize the long history of sterilization, eugenics, and slavery that existed long before the 1970s. It's a lens that is much more focused on where we're going and how that could impact white cis women, instead of where we've been and how that has impacted BIPOC and LGBTQIA bodies. The world Atwood presents is not one that is new. It is one that has already been done and tested on BIPOC bodies, what's new is how it would specifically impact white women. A friend of the Ghouls, Jack Con Music 215, Jacqueline Constance, speaks on this in their TikTok channel. This was like one of the videos that really stood out to me. So they kind of go on to say that two cishet white men, cis women are nothing more than breeders, that they'll gain none of the perks that they've been promised in their alignment with white supremacy, that while this abortion ban will disproportionately hurt BIPOC communities, it was done as a means to increase white births. As mentioned in our previous episodes, the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and the active assault on women's rights/bodies is all motivated by a similar desire for a specific type of child, of white children, of Christian white children. White supremacists believe their culture and future are under attack, and that they are at risk for being erased and made the minority. To combat this, they need to force women to have children. This idea doesn't come from nowhere. All we need to do is look back to history and think of the creation of birth control and its muddied, abusive past in Puerto Rico. I would like to thank Gabe for organizing this, because this was a once in their section and is now in mine.
Mm-hmm.
In an article on Vice titled "The Racist and Sexist History of Keeping Birth Control Side Effects Secret" by Bethy Squires, they explain the decision by the creators of birth control to experiment on bodies they deemed expendable. The team began to have difficulty getting clinical trials off the ground in America, partially because contraception was still illegal in most states, and partially because of the high dropout rate of in their similar studies. So Pincus and Rock looked to Puerto Rico, where concerns about overpopulation, fueled in part by the eugenics movement, meant that there were no birth control restrictions and abortion was legal on the island. In fact, many Puerto Rican women were sterilized without their consent or knowledge in a procedure that was colloquially known as La Operación in 1950s and 60s. Pincus and Rock assumed that they would find a large, compliant population of test subjects. They believed that if poor, uneducated Puerto Rican could use the pill, anyone could. Later, when Puerto Rican women began to complain about the side effects and dropped out of the studies, the team took a crueler method of continuing their trials, and they go on to say that women in Puerto Rico dropped out of the study too. And so they started looking for women they could force to participate, both at home and in Puerto Rico, writes Anne Friedman of the New Republic. Women locked up in Massachusetts mental asylum were signed up. Women enrolled in medical school in San Juan were told that they had to take part in the medical test or face expulsion. Again, these women weren't told what the pill was for. Instead, they were supposed to shut up, take their medicine, and submit to the frequent invasive medical exams. When even this wasn't enough, the team decided to tell the women that it was a form of birth control, but neglected to explain the side effects or that it was a trial and experiment. 3 women died during the study and were never autopsied to see if their participation in the study led to their deaths. Dr. Rice Ray concluded that the pill, at least in the form and of dosage it was given to the Puerto Rican women, had too many side reactions to be generally acceptable. Alice Wilson, leader of the Women's Liberation Collective, later said that the experiments at the hearings, that it must be admitted that women make superb guinea pigs. They don't cost anything. They feed themselves. They clean their own cages, pay for their own bills. They ruminate the clinical observer. We will no longer tolerate intimidation by white-coated gods, antiseptically directing our lives. So the issues go beyond that of just gender. It is at the heart racist and founded in eugenics. The founder of Planned Parenthood, an American feminist named Margaret Sanger, was an advocate of forced sterilization, and in the Justice magazine article by Julia Marsiglio, "Feminism Must Be Intersectional or It's Just an Arm of White Supremacy," they explained this notion of eugenic feminism that was foundational to first wave early feminism and inherently linked to the suffragette movement, explaining that Sanger advocated strongly not only for the forced sterilization of some 15 to 20 million Americans whom she considered undesirables, but also for their segregation into concentration camps. Her idea of undesirables expands to racialized Americans as well, as demonstrated by the, quote, from her private correspondence. We don't want the word to get out that we want to exterminate the Black population, and that the minister is the man who can straighten out the idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members. It is also historically relevant that white women intentionally betrayed Black women in the suffragette movement in attaining the right to vote in 1920s. And there's just like a long historical precedent of white women being the worst. The result made it that many Black women were not allowed to vote until 1965, even though white women were afforded the right to vote in 1920. In the face of racist opposition, white suffragists betrayed the Black women who had also fought for the right to vote, says Elaine Weiss, author of The Women Hour, The Great Fight for the Vote. We have to acknowledge, Weiss says, that white suffragists used as one of their politically expedient arguments, there's more white women who will be voting than Black women, so don't worry. White supremacy is not going to be endangered. White feminism has a long historical precedent of aligning itself with white supremacy to elevate their own position. They have a long history of throwing people to the zombies. They have a long history of aligning themselves with white supremacy and the patriarchy with the hopes that they'll reap some of the benefits. The history just adds even more context to why white feminism being placed above intersectional feminism is so dangerous and is rooted very much in upholding white supremacy and racism. In the same Nerds of Color article that Gabe spoke to, Race, Intersectionality, and the End of the World, The Problem with the Handmaid's Tale, Gibney shares how these horrors in The Handmaid's Tale are very much already happening, just not to the people portrayed in the novel, at least not yet. As Goldswitch explains in The New Statesman, it is already happening. Today, there are parts of the world in which renting a womb of a poor woman is indeed 10 times cheaper than that in the US. The choice of a wealthy white couples is to implant embryos in the bodies of brown women is seen not as a colonialist exploitation, but as a neutral consumer choice. I can't help wondering why, if the fate of the fictional Offred is so horrifying to Western feminists today, the fate of real-life women in surrogacy hostels is causing so little outrage. And further than the discussion of race, there is a class issue as well, women of lower income families, and even now finding themselves faced with a similar choice to that of Offred's. I suppose the main argument of these feminists would be that real-life women choose to be surrogates, whereas Offred does not. But the distinction isn't so clear. But is the distinction so clear? If Offred refuses to work as a handmaid, she may be sent to the colonies where life expectancy is short. Yet even this is a choice of sorts. As she herself notes, nothing is going on here that I haven't signed up for. There wasn't a lot of choice, but there was some, and this was what I chose. In the real world, grinding poverty drives women of color to gestate the babies of the wealthy. As one Indian surrogate tells an interview, Simi Pasha, why would I be a surrogate for someone else if I don't need the money? Why would I make myself go through such pain? So the dystopian future in this book isn't dystopian or future. It exists now and has existed. It's just not happening to cis rich white women.
Yep.
As stated previously, Atwood was inspired by the rise of the Christian right in the United States during the 1970s and 80s, as well as the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. I want to specify that this is less of a problem with Atwood's lens herself and more of just how the inspiration and call to Iran specifically can be problematic, as is often done in an Islamophobic way and is often without the context of what actually led to the revolution. And it's also something that's often done by Islamophobic people when they try to detach the US and Britain from the actual cause of that revolution. And what's often not acknowledged about this is that the revolution in Iran was a revolution puppeted by British and United States oil interests. The article mentioned previously written by Asme Arkia gives some historical context to the Iran Revolution, and they say, before the revolution, homosexuality and same-sex encounters were practiced widely in Iran and were rarely perceived as taboo or sinful. In the wake of the revolution, thousands of LGBTQIA+ people have been prosecuted for their lifestyle, continuing to this day. The link between profit generated from oil business and the exploitation of women and oppression of queer people can be traced back to the Shah Pahlavi's refusal to sell oil to Britain and the US and his desire to nationalize it. The interconnection between bringing foreign oil firms or nationalizing the Iranian industry, and the freeing of women and sexuality or oppressing both cannot be disregarded. When Earth is being violated and used for profit, so are women, and so is their sexuality. They go into the further historical context of how colonialism and exploitation of Iran by Britain and the United States has led to where they are now. So the same Christian countries that demonize Iran on how they treat women are the ones that made that treatment possible because they wanted oil. I've seen TikToks that play into this where it's like kind of the calling out of radical and misinterpreted religion in general, specifically quoting the Bible and parts of the Bible, and then like not telling people that that's what they're doing. And then they're like, wow, the people are like, wow, that's so horrible. That's not my religion. That's that's probably, so they'll say something Islamophobic or horrible.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, no, that was from the Bible. Actually, it's from this section of the Bible actually. And they're like, oh, what? I gotta go. That's crazy. I didn't hear you say that. That's not real. And my point there is that the Christian right manipulates religion to oppress people all the time. They manipulate the words of the Bible just as any other totalitarian power would.
Yeah, and they do that in the book too. Like one of the aunts tells Offred, what is it? Something or the meek?
Oh yeah, she like says the very first part of like. She says the thing, something of the meek, but then said like
precious as a meek, and then she leaves out conveniently that the meek inherit the earth.
Because that's like
just pick and choose.
Yeah, that's what people do, or at least people who are trying to like create a system of oppression, or like find it more convenient for other people to be oppressed if it like positions themselves in even a vague sense of power. But using the Bible and white supremacy to validate the exploitation that they've built into their empire upon their manifest destiny is something that's like a common theme, both in the book, but also just like in our country. My last big point is my problem is that the view of this like rise of Christian right as inspiration, like it implies that the rise of the Christian right implies that at any point they fell. And I understand that there was like this shift of republicanism to include religion times in a more drastic way instead of just like good old fashioned capitalism and racism. But I think a lot of times people will be like the far right. And it's like our founding fathers were the far right. This is not new necessarily. Like the Constitution is the manifesto for the far right. Like they say separation of church and state, but like most of the laws that have been made are drenched in.
They also say black people aren't people.
Yeah,
so.
Like white supremacist Christianity, gross times. So like there's a reason that other countries teach about the United States as being like a radical far right country. Like they say even our Democrats are like far right compared to like progressive countries. So the things that people are so scared of within Gilead, literally one already happened, already exists, currently exist. But they're also like funded and managed by our government and have been funded and managed by our government. So yeah, the perspective of the rising far right is multifaceted in that Republicans being religious was a 1970s thing. So I get like why she pulled from that. But where they used, as I said, the Bible instead of just good old-fashioned racism, capitalism as a reason to be awful. But the result of the shifting in public opinion also led to this in that it was no longer cool to be racist and a bigot. It shifted to damning those things instead of like applauding them. And now they just applaud them behind closed doors. So that's why so many white Americans shout, "Make America Great Again," "Make America White Again," unapologetically and without consequence, guilt, or critique. They want genocide and exploitation, but they don't want to feel bad about it. They want to be able to be racist without people telling them it's wrong. And they want the power white supremacy has promised them, much like what white women have historically done in this country, aligning themselves with the oppressor in the hopes that they will reap the benefits. Gabe already did this quote, so I'm not going to, but it's just that people, if they're given a little power, it's good. They want it. They knew that that was a way to get people to participate, is to dangle power and have women participate in being the oppressors. The reason white women at largely haven't found or haven't fought for intersectional feminism is because they want that scarce power. They don't mind sacrificing others to get it. And it's the environment that like facilitates so much of what's happened in modern times too. It's the environment that's facilitated January 6th. It's the environment that facilitated in the past the Civil War. It's basically just like the North has gotten better at practicing being racist quietly, and the South wants to be racist loudly again. So we're in kind of in this environment that allows for the parable of a sower of America, that allows for a Gilead America. In a lot of ways, we're already there, have been there, and people want it back. So just as a fun additional context, Gabe kind of touched on this, but that's largely what led to the rise of Nazi Germany. In World War I, many Germans needed to be proud of being German again. They were willing to sacrifice the Jewish people to achieve that end. And it was the desire to like feel German nationalism again after great economic disenfranchisement by foreign powers, as well as a period of social reform and progressivism. So like in Nazi Germany, women were starting to get rights. They were getting to go to college. They're all this like progressive stuff was happening, which forced a lot of people to like do unwanted self-reflection and experience shame. And that largely facilitated everyone kind of just being like, it's okay. We just want to feel good about being German again. So they're like, fat totalitarian genocide is fine. Not everyone, obviously, but enough people that happened. And Gabe already said that Nazi Germany based their concentration camps and own eugenics on the United States eugenics and sterilization work, as well as American slavery, in the bulk of their policy creation for Nazi Germany. So to close out, I'll once again quote the article by Asme Arakia that outlines Gilead, just like kind of gives you like a one little quick run over of what Gilead was, and is there really a differentiation much from what we see today. So one pillar of Gilead was the push of an extreme binary gender roles and compulsory heterosexuality. People are separated based on their genitals. So that's the pillar. Does our country do that? Yes. Our country already does this. Our medical system, legislation, schooling system, social structures, bathrooms, all do this. We have gender reveal parties, gendered clothing, gendered toys, gendered bathrooms from the moment of conception. Room full of adults are obsessed with the genitals of babies, obsessed with the genitals of other adults, obsessed with sexuality. As a reminder, gay marriage was not federally legal until June 26, 2015. Same-sex sexual activity wasn't legal nationwide until 2003. There are bills every day attacking trans Americans. We're already there. We're already very obsessed with the gender binary and compulsory heterosexuality. Another pillar of Gilead was the commodification of bodies with wombs capable of reproduction, which we also already do, either by removing the capacity for reproduction of BIPOC, LGBTQIA, and differently abled humans, or by forcing reproduction on white humans, or by economically forcing reproduction on women across the world for white women gain and rich people gain. As I said, or creating economic systems that force the necessity for BIPOC surrogacy. The commodification of bodies with wombs capable of reproduction is something that the government continues to do in the legislation they push, in the violence they profit from, etc. So the next pillar listed for Gilead is freedom and authority are given to white heterosexual men who use this power to kill queer people in the name of God, going as far as hanging their bodies on the wall as a reminder of punishment for homosexuality. As mentioned previously, they actively pass legislation that harms LGBTQIA plus people and especially trans people. While they don't hang them on walls, they do try to erase their existence. They do push legislation that actively harms them. They don't really prosecute people who murder them. As stated, marital and sexual rights weren't in existence until the early 2000s. It could also be argued about the freedom and authority given just to the first part of that, white heterosexual men in the US, and how that actively does harm people through racism and etc. They also are the majority of our government. They have been 99% of our presidents. So, yeah. just a little bit more. What's happening now, in addition to all the things I already said that are just like kind of concerning that people should be like, wow, that's don't do that. I learned that in Missouri it's illegal to get divorced if you're pregnant, and they enforce that. The two good things is that the right to contraception has been codified, at least in the House. Cool. And is moving to the Senate. Only 8 Republicans voted to support this, out of like the hundreds of them. So that sucks. Also, they did codify interracial and gay marriage in the House again.
Still waiting on that Senate, though.
Yeah, it was like 157 of them voted against it, and like 48 voted for it. So that was fun. And also there has been something that like was just very concerning. It's not like necessarily real. Something that's been going around TikTok that I did research, but just as a fun fact, in 2021 North Carolina, there was a bill called Bill 158 that attempted to make it legal to murder a pregnant woman who you knew was seeking an abortion to protect the baby, specifically saying that to get to abortion was an act of first-degree murder, punishable by execution, and that abortion should be prevented with the use of deadly force. This bill has been brought up recently as it has been proposed as a form of misinformation, although the bill does exist. Like someone proposed that, whether or not they got it passed or not, like someone was like, that's a great idea, let's try that. So it's more just concerning that it was proposed at all. Although the people saying like it's happening right now, it's not. Like they pushed, no one's really supported it. It was put up, and they're like, no one's gonna say yes, or like revolution will happen reasonably. But it's not to say that there aren't like hundreds of laws being attempted to be passed across the country that actively. We had the whole Roe v. Wade episode where we talked about that, among all the other things, in terms of the oppression of women, and why intersectional feminism is just so essential, why people need to care about it. Because it's not, you're not going to get the benefits, guys. You're not just like, stop it. You're not going to.
It's blessed are the meek.
Yeah, blessed are the meek.
Blessed are the meek, but they don't talk about how they're going to inherit the earth. Yeah, I saw something on TikTok. It was like footage of like a small town meeting, and it was that they were trying to have anti-racist curriculum in the school, and this like woman was like arguing like we need to see both sides, so we have to show the benefit the other side, and so everyone was laughing at her because they're like, so what you're saying is we need to teach racism. Like that's literally, because the opposite of anti-racism is racism. So what you're saying is we should teach people to be racist. Like, and she just like, it was
getting it. Yeah,
so funny to me. Like you were so, that's how deep you are into this like nonsense.
Yeah,
like it's like, do you hear yourself? And the truth is they don't hear themselves. So
they don't. Yeah, and I mean, even to quote Parable of the Sower, it's like when she told her friend about the system and was like, we need to be prepared to like run, and like we need to make go bags, and like everyone, eventually these walls are going to fall and we're all going to die. She was like, no, I'm going to go tell my mom, that sounds scary and I don't want to deal with that. So I'm going to go not deal with it. And then she goes to an industry town. Spoilers.
And then the whole town was, that happened. The walls came down.
Yeah. Everyone she was right. But it's like the whole idea of the cave, and it's like if people are plugged into it, they're not going to want to leave the cave, and that's just a reality. So, and also it's like
to tell you that it was wrong.
Yeah, like the white supremacy and the patriarchy both benefit from white women not realizing that they should care about other people, about them being racist. Like they actively benefit from that. So I understand why it's hard for them. But also,
I also say like for all of the like Margaret Atwood is in Canada, right? And she completely like at the point of that being published, 1985, that was still when the schools were still active in Canada, of the Indigenous population being
Mm-hmm.
sent to schools and taught to be white and erased of their culture, and some of them murdered. They uncovered thousands of bodies just recently. Like, so
Oh, that's
for
another
all
thing that was on the internet
Mhm.
that's stressful. That
Yeah,
they're trying in the US to like remake that okay. Like that you can take
the
indigenous
schools.
children away. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
yeah. You can watch our episode about the schools. It's in the Rhymes for Young Ghouls
Mm-hmm.
episode by
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Barnaby. We, yeah, I just think like for all this, like clearly these things haven't happened to her, right? And
Mm-hmm.
these problems haven't happened to her, but she does this research, right? She goes in, she learns about the Iran War, revolution. She learns about American history, like again, being from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you can do the research. Like you,
Yeah.
you clearly are capable of doing the
Mm-hmm.
research and putting in the time to tell a full, thought out story. Do that and
Yeah.
like understand like the world that you're creating is bigger than you think it is. Like you have to really consider everything, all part of it. Like I was just thinking that. I was like, I was writing a book that was heavily inspired by Handmaid's Tale and When She Woke and like a bunch of other books of similar vein that was feminist in nature. And one of the biggest critiques that I got when I first started was that it was really small. Like I had
Mm-hmm.
essentially I had to invent a whole world for this situation to have existed, and I
Mm-hmm.
was neglecting that. And that's what really like stopped me from writing it too, was because I was like, I don't know if I can think of this. Like I have to do a lot more work. I have to do a lot more research. So I was like, so I'm not going to do that right now. And so the fact that she, who has all this research, has all this ability, can't do that, you know?
Yeah. I'm
Like
sorry.
just stop and ask,
Me
you
too.
know?
No, it's
Okay.
so real though. Like, and if you don't know, ask somebody. But
Yeah.
I also maybe she did that in the new one. Maybe she did it. You know, my main problem is that just like people are like, this is the only one.
Hmm.
This little tiny view is the only view that matters.
Yeah.
Like that's not. If anything,
And
that's going to take us so much longer to fix anything because y'all think it's the only view that matters.
yeah, and it's like I want to read Ursula Le Guin's book, but I
Mm-hmm.
know that like when we were looking her up to figure out if we were going to do this episode, like do an episode on her, we don't know anything about her, so it'd be weird. But she herself was like, I'm not a feminist, or like I
Yeah.
did more harm than good, but it's because she was a product of her time. Like she was writing at the time that men were writing the same things. Like the fact that she exists as a woman in that space was literally the most feminist thing that she's done,
Yeah.
not like the content entirely. So I think like that's something to say, like for her to admit. Like
Mm-hmm. Like
actually,
acknowledge
don't
it.
give it all that credit. Don't give me all that credit. That ain't it. Is really important, and I feel like Atwood could do that instead of going around with pictures of her in next to Handmaids or being in the show. If she
Mhm.
was in the show, she like hits Offred in episode 1.
Oh gosh.
At this she's in the background. Go check it out, people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just rewatched it. I was like, hey, that's her.
Yeah, I need
Anyway,
to rewatch it too. I just like to know what's happening. I know so much more
yeah.
happened since we stopped watching it, so I was like, I should probably figure that out.
Yeah, that's why I started from the top. Make it drop. Suzu.
Susie wants to be on the camera. She feels
can be
very
on the
strongly about
show.
it.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed our episode. I hope you understand the importance. Also, that again, like I enjoyed the book. I enjoy
Yeah,
Atwood.
I enjoyed the book, but I was also like, ugh, at the end, I don't know. I was just like, what do I do now? Like, I just felt sad, and I get that because, as you said, like that's usually how historical things they're found, and they're just interpreted without actually being able to talk to the person. So it's like, also I get it, but I like the book.
Yeah.
I did. It was fine. But I just remember like ending and being like, oh, I'm sad now. I'm disappointed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not as empowering
What do I
and
do
motivating
with
as
this?
Octavia Butler.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I read Parables first, so I was like,
What are we doing?
that's what I wanted. That was the precedent. I was like, I need it to be as good as this.
Like, y'all just want to be.
Yeah.
You want to be sad so bad.
Mhm.
Just like ask somebody else.
Yeah.
someone else about the world, you'll get real sad.
Yeah.
Watch an episode of ours. Anyway, yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Next week, we're going to be talking about N.K. Jemisin. So that'll be
Mhm.
really fun. And her work is also emotional. It's also
Yeah.
real tough. Oh my God.
We do all this stuff. We do feel very strongly that you should probably read the books that we cover in the series, but also we do it for you in a
Yeah.
way. That's why this episode's almost an hour and a half, because we did it for you.
Yeah.
Also
Yeah,
read,
so.
it's good for you probably if you can.
Yeah, and remember to like and subscribe. Let us know your feelings on Handmaid's Tale. Like, don't get all butthurt about it.
Yeah.
Trust
And
me, you don't have to come to bat for Atwood. She can do that herself.
yeah.
You do not
Yeah.
have to save her.
And I'm not crapping on her. I just recognize her lens is different.
Yeah, it is. And it is.
She
It's
did
insular.
an okay job for 1985.
She told the story she was telling. That's
Yeah.
it. And she didn't try to say somebody else's story. And
I'm
I
not
think
saying I
that's
hate
great.
her.
You know?
She's fine.
Yeah, but let us know if you have any suggestions for things that we can read in the
Yeah.
future. Because Kat likes books now.
I do. I love
reading
books.
I just finished a book today. I read like
Yeah.
a bunch of books all day, all the time. It's my favorite thing. And then yeah, and then we'll be moving on to something else at some point. But yeah, don't get married.
We'll eat your kids, or
Yeah,
we'll take
steal
them.
them.
Yeah.
They'll take them. Make them.
Mhm.
They're actively doing that right now.
Yeah.
You see, Charlie, you need to go. You can't be here. She says, I think I can. Okay.